Good afternoon. I am Cameron Baxter Lewis, Director of Grants and Programs at the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as SURF Plus. I'm a white-skinned cisgendered male that uses the pronouns he, him, and his, and I have short to medium brown hair and a blue shirt on today. I'm joining you today from North Carolina, which is home to the Occaneechi, Lumbee, Coharie, Hollywa-Saponi, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Meherrin, Tuscarora, Saponi, and Waccamaw-Siouan nations, along with many other indigenous peoples living in both tribal homeland and urban settings. North Carolina has the largest population east of the Mississippi, largest indigenous population east of the Mississippi River. We acknowledge and give thanks to the first people of this land and their descendants, and extend our gratitude for their stewardship of the land. As I engage with the Chapel Hill community, which is where I live, it's important to me to acknowledge the ongoing effects of colonization, forced removals, and the erasure of indigenous peoples' history. We commit to learning from and amplifying indigenous voices, supporting Native communities, and working towards justice and equity. I am going to share my screen. The reason this is being recorded is I actually lost power momentarily during our presentation last week. So we are going to record this just so folks who weren't able to catch the last 10 minutes of the presentation will be able to check that out, as well as we received just a few questions that I want to make sure I answer at the end. So I'm going to play this slideshow. I would like to express my gratitude to the City of Berkeley for having me here today. I'm excited to introduce you to the work of the Craft Emergency Relief Fund and to talk to you a little bit about personal preparedness, as well as how to prepare your practice for an emergency. So there's a lot of content to cover. And really this training is meant to get the wheels turning in your mind and for you to take these concepts and then go and create a plan that makes the most sense to you. So thanks again for having me. I'm going to briefly go over the agenda. First, I'll talk about the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which will set the stage for why we are here today. I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking about how to take 5 steps to create a personal preparedness plan. And then we're going to look at some tools and tips for professional safety. And at the end, I'll provide some resources that you could check out that will help you pull all of this information together. So I want to provide you some background and information on the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which was founded in 1985 as a grassroots mutual aid organization. When artists used to go to craft shows, they would always hear about somebody who was having an emergency, whether that was an illness or a theft or a car accident, and they would pass around a hat and collect donations for them. Fast forward to today, that concept has remained at the core of the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, and we work to support craft artists in any emergency that they may be experiencing. So we work in preparedness, response, advocacy, and our definition of a craft artist, which was a question from one of the audience members, is on our website. There are some mediums that are more typically found within craft artists, such as ceramics, or glass, or wood, or fiber. There's many mediums, but we really look for a manipulation of 3D materials and a consistent art practice for our programming. So again, I encourage you to check out our definition. It is specific without being too specific. I want to first off acknowledge this beautiful artwork in the previous slide. This is the artist that created it, Damun Melkonen, the big chief of the Young Seminoles. Absolutely love his work. So just want to pay homage to him for just a moment. So what does the Craft Emergency Relief Fund do? Well, there's a couple programs I want to talk to you about. The first of which is what we're most or best known for, and that's our emergency relief program. And those are $3,000 grants to craft artists who've experienced a practice-threatening or serious emergency. So that program runs year-round, and those emergencies can mean a lot of different things. They could be some of the things we just mentioned: an illness, a theft, an injury. Climate-related disasters are about half of the number of grants we give out. And this program in the past 5 years has doubled in size. And the biggest reason for that is we're seeing a lot more folks apply due to climate-related disasters. So definitely check out that program if you're a craft artist who's hit a rough patch and need a little additional support, or if you know of a craft artist that could fit within those eligibility guidelines, definitely send them our way. Out of our emergency relief work came our preparedness work, where we have created a Get Ready program. And these are $500 for craft artists to conduct activities that will safeguard their studios or protect their practices from future emergencies. And the projects for that are pretty broad. It can encompass a lot of different things. They could be taking different safety measures within your studio, such as installing an filtration system. They could also involve legacy planning, creating a will for yourself, and some more unique things. During the pandemic, we expanded some of the eligible activities to include things such as paying for childcare if an artist really needs support during a busy season to focus on creating their work. They can use a grant for helping with the cost of childcare. So that program runs typically 2 cycles per year, a spring and a fall. We also have a special cycle this year for Puerto Rican artists that will happen this summer, thanks to some generous funding. But our regular programming will resume this fall, and it's looking like around October 10th, we're going to open up that program. So definitely apply if you're interested. Really great program. And we realize that giving folks money after emergency wasn't always the best approach. We want to support the whole practice. So this program is really great at thinking forward. And then lastly, I will mention our Gifts in Kind program, where we work with a variety of small and large businesses that support the craft community, and they give us donations that then we give to artists who've experienced an emergency. Example of that would be Scott Kilns. They provide us 3 kilns a year for artists who have lost their kiln, typically due to a climate-related disaster or a fire, but sometimes something else may have happened. So really great program, provides an extra boost to artists who are in a hard time. In the past 5 years, you could see we have awarded more than $3 million in direct assistance to more than 2,000 craft artists. So before we talk about how to prepare your studio and practice, we want to talk about personal preparedness. So we're going to look at 5 steps on how to make a plan. All of the information I will talk about is on ready.gov. So if there's something you missed, something you have additional questions about, ready.gov will have those answers for you. But the first step in making a plan is being aware of what sort of emergencies might be happening in your area. And the emergency management sector absolutely loves acronyms. They have a whole book on acronyms that's administered through FEMA called the FAT book, but just absolutely love acronyms. So I will try to keep light on those, but there are a few of them to mention, the first of which is WEAs, which are wireless emergency alerts. And those are messages from trusted officials within your community. And most often we are familiar with these through our phones. So I have an iPhone, but if you go into notifications and check that out, you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see something called government notifications, and you can scroll through and see which one of those you have on, whether those are Amber alerts, whether those are other emergency alerts. And that's kind of our first and often best way of getting information for many of us who have our phones on us at all times. If you are not so much into phones or maybe don't have a smartphone, The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, that's my second acronym, has a radio broadcast where they are constantly telling the weather within your area. You have to look up what specific station to tune into. I personally have purchased a weather radio, about $15 or $20. It's battery operated. So should the cell towers go down and I need to continue to get information, I can just listen to that weather radio. And unbelievably, I have brought it out a time or two during hurricane season when the power goes out. Also, there's a lot of apps out there. FEMA has an app, Weather Channel has an app. You can download those if that's your preference and just sign up for different emergency alerts so that you're aware of what's happening. So that's the first step, be aware. Secondly, you want to consider sheltering. And sheltering can mean different things. It could be shelter in place, meaning if I'm in my home right now and something happens, where am I going to go within my home? What am I going to need to bring with me? How am I going to protect the space? Ready.gov has some great tips on how to do that. Some of those are a little bit more deep, such as bringing duct tape to seal up any windows if there's any sort of noxious gas. But some are pretty basic, like getting to interior walls and making sure that you're out of the way of dangerous objects. So think about sheltering in place in your home, but also think about where you spend a lot of your time, whether that's at work or elsewhere. Where would you go in the event of an emergency in those situations? And then secondly, I want to talk about mass care. And mass care looks like different things. There are shelters that are administered by the state or American Red Cross or another organization where folks will evacuate to. And usually that's outside or in higher ground than where the impact is expected to happen. And you can find out where those are by texting the number 43362. Again, that's 43362. You text the word shelter and your zip code, and FEMA will send you a list of shelters in your area within a 200-mile radius. Now, if there's not anything currently open, that means that that potentially no emergencies have happened. And that was another question from one of the audience members that came up, that there was no shelters available. Well, that's probably a good thing. That probably means nothing's going on in your area. But you want to think about where you would evacuate to and how you would get there. And some folks have to evacuate, especially in more urban settings, on foot. So you want to think about where you would walk to if you had to. Where would you go? So again, sheltering is the second step, really critical to figure that out. And the last thing I'll mention, if you're planning to stay with family or friends, let them know ahead of time that you're coming, just so they can be prepared for that, because nobody appreciates unexpected house guests. So once you've figured out how to get the weather, once you've figured out your shelter plan, the third thing we want to talk about is how to get there, which is your evacuation route. And you want to have a best case evacuation route, and you want to have alternative evacuation routes. Best case for me is that I go onto our main road, I pick up a smaller interstate, I get on the bigger interstate, and I head out of town. But realistically, that's what everybody around me is going to do. And potentially some of those roads are going to be congested or maybe even closed. So you want to be aware of what local officials are saying and traffic patterns. And if you need to take an alternative route, where are you going to go? For me, that involves going more rural, out into the country, taking various small roads, and then circling around and hopefully picking up a main road. So you want to think about those evacuation routes and choose destinations and different locations just in case something's going on. So fourth step, and potentially the most important, is your family or household communication plan. So you may not be together with everyone in your house when an emergency happens. So how are you going to get reconnected? Where are you going to go? What do you need? And what are the roles and responsibilities of different folks within your family? And if you have small kids, something I'm very adamant about is making sure they know your first name and last name should a first responder need to get them back into contact with you or another adult, and your address if possible. And if you're like, my child's not going to remember that, and they're not going to remember that they're too young, or maybe they just don't know, then you can create a tag on their backpack or whatever they carry. So if somebody finds them, they can see your address, your name, your phone number, and any medicines that child might be on, should they need to be aware of that while they get you reconnected with them. So really important that your child has that information on them. Also consider your pets in your planning. How are you evacuating with them? Some mass care shelters allow pets, some do not. Do you have enough pet food? Think about your pets and your family and household plan as well. So again, some great templates on ready.gov. Please check those out. And then lastly, I'm going to mention an emergency preparedness kit. There's a lot of different ways to put these together, but the theory behind them is you want to be prepared to be on your own for 72 hours. So how much water do you need for everybody in the family, including your pets? How much food do you need? What sort of medicines do you need? What sort of important documents do you need? And you want to think those out. And how much cash do you want to have on hand? You want to think those out ahead of time, and really, if they're not all in one place in a bag that's easy to grab, how quickly can you pull that stuff together? You want to think about that. And if you have children, you might want to have a separate bag for them that has activities, because you don't want to be with 4 children for a long period of time. And maybe you even want to consider having one for your pets that just has some basic supplies. So think about the needs of your family for that period of time, and make sure you have some of those supplies on hand. I'll also advocate for getting gas in your car. And if you know a disaster is coming, meaning you have some warning, whether it's days or whatever, make sure you get gas quickly, because there's typically a run on gas and groceries. Now, obviously, if it's something where you have much less warning, like an earthquake or tornado, that's not feasible. But depends on the situation, and you want to have a plan that addresses those. And then lastly, I mentioned you don't want to make a plan, set it on the shelf, and forget about it. Everybody's going to forget all the parts of it. Where are we meeting again? How do we communicate with one another? So you want to revisit that plan on an annual or semi-annual basis, and make sure that folks are empowered with that information. And the last thing I will say, if all the cell towers go down, sometimes the easiest way to communicate with folks is actually via text message. So just an important thing to keep in mind. Sometimes phone calls won't go through, but text messages will. So another thing you want your family to be aware of. So we've talked a lot about personal preparedness. We're now going to move into professional preparedness, which I think is why most of you came here today. I want to start by giving acknowledgement to this beautiful poster that ServPlus put together in 2018. It's our studio safety guide, and it's a quick place that if you're setting up a studio or you're just trying to make sure it is safe, you can look at different categories and think through the topics. So electrical, do I have the appropriate circuits and wiring? Insurance, which we're going to talk about, do I have the appropriate business or renter's insurance? Is the overall structure safe? Is there anything I need to think about there? Do I have a plan? Do I have exit plans? So it's great, really good tool. You can download that for free from our website and put it up within your studio if you find that helpful. But just a great resource. And then we also have a studio safety guide where you can walk through and read about each of these different elements. It's formatted slightly differently with a little more text and detail, but also a great resource to consider. So when you're planning to protect your practice or career, I want to first start off by thinking about our assets. And our assets are the critical things to your artistic practice that you could not afford to lose. And so I'm going to talk through some different categories here. The first of which I want to talk about is structures. So that's any sort of physical structure that's important to creating your work, whether it's a studio space, a classroom space, a gallery space, whatever that is, it's important to your work. You want to think about the structures as an asset. Secondly, you want to think about things that can include the work that you create, your tools and equipment, your technology you use to promote your work, the things that are important to your practice. Third, I want to mention people and relationships, and that's anyone that's really essential to your work. That can include studio assistants, customers and clients, students, galleries, mentors, etc. Who are the critical people within your network for your practice? And then lastly, I want to mention events. And that could be classes, performances, shows, or any other event that are part of your artistic practice. So those are kind of 4 ways to think about your assets. So you want to write those down. And once you have, that helps you understand kind of the scope of your business. Step 2 is to identify the risk to your business. And this can be really challenging and a little bit overwhelming. So I want you to give yourself some grace, but you can think of risk in different categories. We talked about climate-related disasters. I personally think that should be on most of our radars. What sort of disasters are most prevalent in our area? Is that floods? Is it fires? Is it earthquakes? Is it tornadoes? Is it something else? List those out, as well as all sorts of other type of risks. What about theft or damage to your studio or equipment? Illness and injuries we've talked about. Economic downturns with the pandemic, how did that affect your practice? Technological failures or data loss. And then lastly, I think something we plan for least that happens to all of us are personal emergencies, family crises, a death in the family. How are you going to deal with that disruption to your practice? So you want to list out all those risks, and then you're going to want to put steps 1 and 2 together. So these are your assets. How would these risks start to impact those assets? You want to think through different scenarios. And this is a step that can feel overwhelming, but what I encourage you to do is prioritize. Think about the things that are most likely to happen. So if one of your risks is that the sun will burn out, that's true, but maybe not a priority for now. Maybe it's much more likely that your studio is going to flood. And if your studio floods, how does it affect all of your assets? How does it affect the physical structure? How does it affect the people? How does it affect each of the elements of your practice? And start thinking through that, because that is going to help you create a plan that protects you. I'm going to switch gears just a minute, and then we're going to dive into business insurance. But part of your planning should include documentations, which is the what and the how. Do you have a record of important documents? And I've listed some of those here: contracts and invoices, insurance, taxes, wills, sales, resume, inventory, etc. Do you have those things written down in a place that's easy to access? And the second part of that is how. How have you documented those? One of the easiest ways to document your artwork and critical assets is using your smartphone. I have a picture of somebody taking a picture of their tools there. You can go around your studio or your space and take pictures of everything. And then save those to a cloud. You don't want to have them just saved on the device in case that device gets damaged or lost. You can save them to Google Drive or Dropbox or one of the other cloud storage systems out there. So when you document your artwork, you also want to be very specific about what you're taking a picture of. Trust me, if you ever have to apply for any support from insurance, this information will be critical. So you want details, such as the title of the photo or the video, the medium, the price, the sales record, the date, the condition, the approximate year and cost that you purchased it, etc. And that's where we get into something a little bit different. And this may speak to you. You might also want to have a spreadsheet. And SurfPlus has a number of spreadsheets on our website that you can check out. We have one that tracks art inventory, equipment, sales, and consignments. It helps you categorize these things in a way that makes sense. So, one possible combination of how you want to document is maybe you want to take a picture, maybe you want to have a spreadsheet that lists all the details of that picture. That's a great combination of those tools. But if you're the type of person who says, that's not enough for me, I really want a comprehensive inventory software. There are a lot of those out on the market. They range in cost from as little as $50 for light versions of Artwork Archive and Art Tracker to close to $1,000 for programs like ArtStax. It's important for you to find a program that fits your price point and your needs. And it's worth noting that most of these software tools focus on the artwork itself and the related content, such as your contacts and consignments. However, GYST or GIST is an exception because it includes an artist's supplies. So consider researching, finding a tool that works for you. But there's a lot of great softwares out there as well if you want to go that route. Insurance is a piece we're going to spend a little bit of time on. Obviously, one of the best ways to protect your artistic career or practice and your assets is having the proper coverage. Insurance can feel overwhelming, and SurfPlus has created this pocket guide. It is a really great tool, maybe a 15 to 20-minute read, depending how fast you are. Every time I open it up, I learn new things. So we're going to talk about a couple types of business insurance and liability. And I'm going to encourage you to check out this pocket guide for additional insurance or addendums that you might be interested in for your practice. The first of which I want to talk about, the first business insurance, is protecting your structural asset, as you remember listing out our assets, and that's property or building insurance. And that protects the physical structure of your studio. If your studio is located in a building that's the same property of your home, your homeowner's insurance may not cover that. You want to be very familiar with your homeowner's insurance policy. There's a lot of assumptions that artists say, well, my tools were in my house and my house is my studio. It's not always the case that the homeowner's policy will cover those lost tools because they're part of a separate business. So make sure you understand those policies. So that's the first type of business insurance you want to consider having. The second is personal property. So maybe that's your tools, your equipment, your raw materials, your work in progress, finished products, etc. Personal property insurance will help cover some of those costs. The third of which is a confusing name to me, but that's the inland marine insurance. And that protects your artwork and property while it's in transit or away from the studio, such as when you're teaching, doing an installation, or an arts festival. And then the fourth thing you want to consider is personal property of others. If you do repair work or conservation work, you need insurance for your work and your care, but you may not cover the damage of something that you do to the work. So for example, if you put a hammer through a painting while you're trying to restore it, that insurance may not cover it. But it's worth looking into if you do a lot of restoration work, if you do a lot of repair work, you have other folks' artwork in your care, you might want to look at that. It's important to talk to an insurance agent who specializes in art-related coverage to ensure that you have the right coverage to meet your needs. Next, we're going to talk about liability. I think this is where a lot of us hear the most horror stories. Somebody came on my property, they tripped, they sued me for $1 million. Liability is that coverage, general liability is that coverage that protects you if someone's injured while they're on your property or if your property causes damage to them. And liability insurance stays with you when you're at a location that's other than your studio, but there's some other types of liability you might want to be aware of. The first of which is products and operations liability. So that covers you in the event that someone's injured by a product that's yours, or while you're performing your work somewhere, maybe you're injured, someone is injured. You want to make sure to consider having product and operations liability. The third is important. If you teach or you write, we have errors and omission liability, which protects you if somebody is injured following your advice or injured because you forgot to mention something in your teaching and then they ended up getting hurt. So errors and omissions is an interesting one, but important to consider if you are a writer or a teacher or frequently engaging with the public and telling them how to do things. And then lastly, I'll mention umbrella. An umbrella is exactly like it sounds. It's providing more blanket coverage. It kicks in when general liability is exhausted, typically in increments of $1 million. From my experience, umbrella insurance is often cheaper than you would anticipate and might give you that extra sense of security when you go to bed at night. So you might want to look into umbrella policy for yourself. So we discussed business insurance, we discussed liability. There's a lot of other insurances out there. Typically certain events like floods and earthquakes will not be covered by other insurances and require their own policy. Definitely want to be aware of that if you're in an area where that's a threat. But there's all sorts of other insurances out there, extended business income, extra expenses, etc. This guidebook is a great place to check that out. So again, I encourage you to look at it, try to understand which policy makes the most sense to you. And ultimately what you're trying to do is develop a business commentary. So that's a 1 to 2 page document that really helps list out the critical assets and components of your practice and what sort of insurance you're looking for to help reduce those costs. So honesty is really key when you're working with an insurance agent. That will allow them to find the appropriate underwriter who are interested in providing coverage for your specific business. It's important to shop around. I would encourage you to talk to multiple insurance agents. Don't assume because an agency sells a type of insurance that they necessarily are experienced in it. So make sure you ask plenty of questions, ask their colleagues which insurances they're using. You want to be armed with as much knowledge as you can. And you want to also realize when certain coverage is unnecessary or maybe out of your price point. Some insurance is obviously better than no insurance, but you want to get the appropriate coverage for your practice. And then lastly, I do want to mention that there's some places you can go to check the financial stability of an insurer. There's a resource called AM. That's AM as in morning, BEST, BEST, and that provides free basic rating reports. So you can check out an insurance agency using AM BEST to get a sense of how they have operated in the past. But you can also ask your insurance representative if any claims have been made on the type of insurance they're offering and what sort of turnaround time you could expect if you were in that situation. And obviously, if you get any, red flags or you feel their service is unreasonable, then look at other companies. Make sure you are empowered to have other conversations and make the best decision for yourself. So we talked about a lot. As I mentioned, the last part of our conversation will be around some resources. SurfPlus has a Studio Protector Guide. It's on our website. You can go and you can, if you're a type of person who just wants to check out all the resources, you could head straight there, or you could get started. And if you click get started, it's going to bring you through some of the exercises we did today. First of which is understanding your risk and your assets, and then it'll help you hone in on a personalized plan. So a couple other resources. We have one on putting together your legacy. So how do you put your non-artistic assets into an estate plan? This is something that's crucial, that's sometimes an afterthought. Estate planning is how your legacy will live on. So check that out. I mentioned our studio safety guide. That's kind of a more detailed version of the poster that we looked at. And then we also have a series of videos on wellness. We know that a lot of artists, because of the toll it takes on your body with repetitive motions, get injured. So we have a series of videos on how you can protect your body and your practice. Make sure you have the right tools and equipment to do that. These are some of the resources that will happen if you click on browse your resources. They're emergency specific ones that help you address certain disasters that you might have identified during your risk assessment. But I also want to again mention ready.gov, which we were checking out, as well as some of our partners who have artist and artist specific resources for you all. One that I check out periodically is the New York Foundation of the Arts. They have an emergency resources page that does a good job of curating specific resources for artists who may be impacted by a recent emergency. So definitely check that out if you're looking for either local or state or national programs specifically geared towards artists. And then that's it. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for having here. I think I addressed both questions that I heard, but if anything else comes up, please by all means email me at cameron@surfplus.org. And I hope everything goes well, and I hope you were able to learn a couple new things today